All right, hello and welcome back to the Civil War Podcast. Glad that you are here, and thank you for joining us. We've covered a lot of ground so far. We're just about ready to engage in the actual battles, but we were going to finish up this week with our last pre-war talk, and then we will get into some of the battles, which will be looking at through the eyes of the generals who participated. And just to kind of give you some future podcasts, we'll first talk about the life of General Stonewall Jackson. And I think you're going to find him to be a very interesting character. I know that I do. And then we'll look at the battles through his eyes and how he saw things and all. But that's just a little taste of what's coming up. But today we're going to conclude. We really kind of built the whole scenario of, a lot of times when you look at when we listen to Civil War history and all, there's a lot of emphasis on certain things, like, for example, talking about slavery, right? Or I was listening to a seminar given in the professor was talking, really going into the concepts of the abolitionists, which were important, right? Of course, these are all parts of it, but what I'm looking at is I want to kind of delve into what I feel is not neglected, but maybe kind of an underappreciated aspect, which is what was going on in Congress during this time. And so, as we go back into the 1850s, so we had the Mexican-American War, which the end result was the United States got a ton of land that now we needed to decide, would these be slave-owning states or so-called free states. And the reason this was important was because in Congress, we had to maintain the balance of power. So we had to have an equal number of slave states to free states. Otherwise, one side would gain a majority over the other. And that, to me, was really what the line in the sand was, where the Missouri Compromise really kind of started this all. And so we got all this new land, and we don't know what to do, right? We want to bring these as in these new territories into states, but should they be slave owning or should they be free? And both sides were doing their best, meaning that the southern slave owning states were sending people to try to create, like, Kansas to be a slave owning state. Missouri already was there, so a lot of the Missourians went over. But then the North sent a bunch of people into the remaining territories, remaining area in that territory. The Missouri people got in there first, got all the good spots, and then but then they basically, you had two constitutions drafted for Kansas. One was for being a slave owning, and one was for being a free state. So that created a ton of controversy in Congress of what to do, and that's where we really kind of see, like, the and I did mention this before, the movie Josie Wales, while it takes place in Missouri, it was like that the Jayhawkers, the abolitionists on the one side, versus the bushwhackers, the slave owning component group on the other, and how they would just guerrilla warfare all over the territories, was really a foreshadowing of what was to come. And so we look at this, and we see there's a lot of trouble in Congress, and there was a party that was really picking up seats and making grounds. They were picking up seats from the Whig Party, from the Northern Democrat Party, because the Whigs and the Democrats, while they both had northern and southern seats in both sides, all states, it seemed like the northern were not abolitionists enough, right? they were called dough faces. They were not like going to say no to slavery. But the Republican Party, well, I wouldn't say new, but the reformatted Republican Party is 100% abolitionist, 100% against slavery. So much so that they were aggressively against it, which is what started to cause a lot of problems. Now, when you look at it, people today say Republicans. No, it couldn't be. But yeah, Republicans, the party of Lincoln, were very aggressive. That's where we get the whole term of Northern aggression, is from that. The Northern Republicans, who had their mandate, who had their agenda, to to defeat slavery. And so in 1856, the Republicans picked up a number of seats. They did try to get a president elected, but they failed. He didn't get enough, but they picked up a majority of seats. And the and there was a lot of friction going on in Congress. And that's where we have the famous Charles Sumner caning, where Sumner, who was a Northern representative, was nearly beaten to death by a Southern congressman with a cane, just right in. They just, I think it was in his office, but they just wham, 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 wham until the cane broke. It took him 3 years to recover from that beating, but it shows you the violence that was going on, and a lot of representatives started to carry guns, knives, because they were afraid. There was actually a safety concern of actually going to Congress and being beaten. So many representatives started to carry guns with them or have guns in their offices. And you could find a lot of letters that state that they didn't want to, they abhorred it, but they felt there's no safety, and so they did this. And there was actually a huge brawl that happened on the floor of Congress between Republicans and Southern Democrats at one point. And a brawl, imagine that, fist fights. Now, today everybody's, MMA, and I'm sure there would have been a lot of, ground and pound and chokeouts. But back then it was a lot of slugging. And, this fear from the aggressive agenda of the Republicans put the Southern states, Southern Democrats, Southern Whigs, at, now it really did. There was always threats of secession, but now it really did seem like you guys are giving us no choice. And when John Brown attacked Harpers Ferry, this fed into the Southern states' greatest fears, which were, the fear was that Republicans would take control. Republican agents would then be appointed to go down into their states as federal appointees and start abolishing slavery. And so there was fear of riots, of emancipated slaves just murdering former owners and all. And that was a real fear that they had. And the Republicans did nothing to alleviate this. In fact, the support of James Brown and what he did, which was basically going into a munitions, army munitions, and trying to take all the guns and everything to arm free slaves, was the worst nightmare. And so this really did start to give the Republicans really did start to push the Southerners out. And so when we look at the secession, was it because, Southerners were just going to be, no, we're keeping our way of life, this is what we do, is, or was there a bit of fear? I think it was a mixture. I think it was a big mixture. I don't think it's easy. I don't think you can just go say, oh, well, it was black and white. I don't think that it's that easy. I think there was a lot of components in it. And the one thing that I see, what I lack of, is any type of resolution being given. There were resolutions, but they were not practical. There was no real thought out plan on how do we emancipate, how do we stop slavery, emancipate the slaves, how do we bring them into society, which would be workable, right? You got to have a plan, and there was none. There was a lot of just rhetoric, a lot of stormy words, a lot of fighting, a lot of things, which of course doesn't, which of course when you start drawing lines in the sand, you're going to get people, moving one side or the other. So another strong component that I think is also overlooked is is how technology came to be and was being implemented. Now, when we think of it, we think like technology, the internet, right? But no, it was the telegraph, the wire. And now, news can be sent almost instantaneously. So something that happens in the afternoon in Congress can be in the 5 o'clock newspapers up in New York, or in Richmond. When we look at the telegraph, we think, what is this? Well, some of you may remember the fax machine, when the fax machine came out. And what a wonderful device that was, right? You hook it up to the phone, you get a phone line number, you have one fax, call the other, and you can start putting documents in, and it would, boom, come right across, printed out. And for those of you that remember, what a game changer that was in business. Now, when you have overseas companies, like where I worked, we had our, all the Japanese, I worked for a Japanese company, our headquarters in Tokyo, our, subsidiary in Osaka, and et cetera, would be faxing us in Los Angeles the orders of the day, what we needed to do. And I mean, it literally just, instead of waiting days for documents to arrive, it was like literally, it happened that day, it was sent to us, and we acted upon it in our time. So, for example, they're 12 hours ahead. Well, this is using East Coast time. They're 12 hours ahead. So something that then happens in the afternoon in Tokyo, and they need a response, gets sent to us here in the U.S. We act upon it, and it could even be like as early as 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Tokyo time, 8 a.m., 9 a.m. our time, when an answer is given. So really tremendous technological improvements. And so the telegraph the wire was the same way, right? So it was more like, a brawl would happen. And then that was reported on like that same day or that next morning. It was in the papers. And so congressmen were finding that bad behavior, right? Just going out and, yelling and screaming and, carrying on. In the past, they could write their narrative, right? They would have time to meet with the journalists, and they could write their own letters and send it to the paper so that the day that the article got published, their letter rebuking it or giving their side of the story could be given. But now there was no. It was, the reporters watched it, ran to the telegraph office, typed it up, and off it went. And so the newspapers were reporting it pretty much as it happened, which was new. And I don't think that there was this kind of revolutionized how information was being processed. And so now you had much more engagement of the populace, because now the populace was, being able to react. Another example of this was back when President Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, and his usage of Twitter, right? If you remember, he would constantly be posting things on Twitter, which would keep you engaged into day to day what was happening, and it was a breakthrough. Nowadays, everybody's on Twitter doing things, but when he did it, that was something that no one else was doing, and that really, I think, for him helped solidify that his election back then against Hillary. And anyway, it was kind of the same thing. Politicians were not. This was new. They weren't really aware of how to deal with this, and so now you have their constituents being more engaged and saying, hey, what the heck's going on? Which is also why I think the Republican Party grew so much in that time. So we have all of this going on. Finally, 1860 rolls around, and Lincoln gets elected, the Republican. And for the South, their worst fears have come true. Now, not only the House and Senate, now not only majority Republicans, or close to majority Republicans, but now we have a president who's a Republican. And so our worst fears have been actualized. They will be sending agents down to our states, and they will start abolishing slavery, and there will be uncontrolled happenings. And so these states then, maybe in, you could think of it in self-preservation, decided that's it, we're not going to allow this to, we're not going to allow them to do this to us. And they started to secede. Again, very complex issue, many other components involved, but this was my, I wanted to add in some additional thoughts, food for thought to you. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. So we're at the point now where South Carolina has succeeded, and we're going to get into, we'll talk about the bombing of the fort here in Charleston next time, as well as we'll start talking about General Stonewall Jackson and his accomplishments and his views. And as we go forward, we'll look at Sherman. To me, Jackson, Sherman, and Grant had a lot in common. And were they right? Were they wrong? Well, we'll look at their views on how they dealt with things, but we'll also take a look at Lee, McClellan, those other generals in the battles, and also getting into it now. Very exciting. So thank you again. Hope to see you again soon. Till then, cheers. Bye.